Hello Biology 202 students. Welcome to your online lecture. Today we will learn about the heart. The average heart beats about 100,000 times a day. It pumps around 5 quarts of blood through 60,000 miles of blood vessels daily, enough to circle the globe 2.4 times. In the course of 1 year, it will have pumped enough blood to fill an Olympic swimming pool. That's 2.5 million liters. In a 70-year lifetime, the average human heart beats more than 2.5 billion times. Unfortunately, heart disease is the leading cause of death in the US, and it affects both men and women. That's why understanding the heart is so crucial. So let's begin. Here is our agenda for today. We'll pinpoint the heart's location, discuss its layers and chambers, trace the blood flow in the heart, and delve into the electrical conduction system, and identify these structures in a sheep heart. So let's get started. The heart resides posterior to the sternum, within the thoracic cavity's mediastinum, slightly left of center between the lungs. The base of the heart, right here, is where the large vessels like the vena cava and aorta attach. And the apex, here, points down and to the left. So that will help you understand which side of the heart you're looking at. Remember, anatomical positions are always in relation to the patient. So this is the patient's left side, and this is the patient's right side. Clinically, understanding the heart's orientation is vital, especially in imaging, surgeries, and CPR. So take a look at these two images and get a good understanding of where the heart is located and what position it's in. So here we have a coronal cut of the heart. You can see the apex is on the bottom and pointing to the patient's left. Therefore, we are looking anteriorly at the heart. Let's talk about the pericardium and the layers of the heart. First, we have the pericardium, which surrounds the heart, consisting of the fibrous and serous layers. The pericardial cavity contains serous fluid to reduce friction. The heart is constantly beating, and we do not want to build up friction with the heart and surrounding tissues. That would hurt a lot. The heart wall consists of the epicardium, or visceral pericardium, and the myocardium, which is the muscle, and the endocardium. So let's talk a little more about these tissues. So surrounding the heart is the pericardium. It's comprised of fibrous and serous layers. The fibrous layer is the outermost part, and it's tough and fiber-like, so it's protecting the heart. The pericardial cavity is filled with serous fluid, which reduces friction. This is the same kind of fluid that's found in your joints that prevent them from rubbing against each other when you articulate your joints. If the pericardium is inflamed, you can get pericarditis. And if the pericardium has been punctured, you might get fluids pressing in on the heart. That's called a pericardial effusion, which is an abnormal accumulation of fluid in the pericardial cavity, which can lead to cardiac tamponade, where the pressure against the heart is high enough to actually reduce the heart's efficiency of pumping blood through the body. It's a life-threatening condition requiring immediate intervention. Next, we have the 3 layers of the heart. The epicardium, which is the outermost part of the heart, and it's also considered to be the visceral pericardium. The myocardium, which is the actual muscle of the heart, and the thickest part of the heart tissue. And then we have the endocardium, which is the inner membrane of the heart. Now let's talk about the important exterior structures of the heart, excluding the major blood vessels. We'll talk about those in following slides. Understanding these structures is key to identifying the heart's anatomy during our lab dissections. First, we'll talk about the auricles. These small ear-like flaps are attached to the atria. The right auricle is attached to the right atrium, and the left auricle to the left atrium. Auricles provide additional space for blood to be stored in the atria. It's basically a sac that expands when blood is in there. We also have the interventricle sulci. These grooves on the heart's surface separate the ventricles. The anterior interventricular sulcus is located on the front of the heart, or the anterior aspect of it, while the posterior interventricular sulci is on the back, or posterior part of the heart. These sulci contain the coronary arteries and veins that supply blood to the heart muscle itself. The coronary sulcus, also known as the atrioventricular groove, encircles the heart and marks the boundaries between the atria and the ventricles. It houses the coronary blood vessels and vessels that supply the heart. We talked about the apex. This is the pointed end of the heart, located at the bottom or inferior part of the heart. The apex points down and to the left, resting on the diaphragm. Clinically, the position of the apex is important when listening to the heart sounds with a stethoscope. The base is the opposite end of the apex. The base of the heart is its broader top part. This region is where the atria are located and where the major blood vessels enter and exit the heart. You can see here some cardiac fat. These are fat deposits that are found along the coronary sulcus and other areas on the heart's surface. This fat protects the coronary blood vessels and serves as an energy reserve for the heart muscle. It is important to know these structures for procedures like coronary artery bypass grafting, or CABG surgery, where precise anatomical knowledge is needed to access and bypass blocked coronary arteries. Understanding these external landmarks helps in correctly identifying the heart's orientation and is vital for both surgical procedures and diagnostic imaging. In our next slide, we will look at the posterior structures of the heart. We are now looking at the backside of the heart, also known as the posterior. You can now see that the directions match your own, so the right is actually on your right and the left should be on your left. Notice the posterior interventricular sulcus just running down there, separating the left and right ventricles. Also, take a look at these 6 different vessels on the top of the heart, 3 going to the left and 3 going to the right. The top are blue and the bottom are red. What could this mean? Well, these are some of the major vessels leading to the lungs. The blue have lower oxygen levels than the red. Take a moment to think where the blood might be moving, and then we can move on to talking more about these major vessels. We will talk about the vessels in the order in which blood flows, and later we will tie it all together. The superior and inferior vena cava are where blood enters the heart from the head, arms, and legs and abdomen, moving into the right atrium, where the blood will then go into the right ventricle and then into the pulmonary arteries. And there's this part here, the pulmonary trunk, that separates into the right and left pulmonary arteries, which then goes to the lungs and comes back through the pulmonary veins. Remember, veins carry blood back to the heart, and arteries carry blood away from the heart. This pulmonary circuit is different from the rest of the body because the blood leaving the heart is deoxygenated, and the blood returning is oxygenated. Now, with oxygen-rich blood, it moves into the left side of the heart, and it pumps into the ascending aorta, across the aortic arch, and down the descending aorta, to be distributed throughout the body. Let's take a look at the inside of the heart. We have 4 chambers and 4 valves. The top 2 chambers are the atria, and the bottom are the ventricles. These atria collect blood from outside the heart and pump it to the ventricles. The ventricles are responsible for moving blood out of the heart. Something to take note of is the size difference between the myocardium of the left and right ventricles. The left has a much thicker myocardium because that is the side that is pumping blood through the rest of the entire body. So it has to be quite strong. You can see the middle layer of the heart there. Very thick because it has to pump super hard to get it through your entire body. You can take a look at this diagram. This helps simplify the blood flow in the heart, but we're going to talk about that more in the coming slides. Valves ensure one-way blood flow. We have the tricuspid, the pulmonary semilunar valve, the mitral valve, and the aortic semilunar valve. So for the tricuspid, there's a key root word there. Tri means three. There's three leaflets. These individual flaps are called leaflets. And this is on the right side of the heart. It's also called the right atrial ventricular valve. And that's because it's located between the atrium and the ventricle on the right side. And so this one has three leaflets, and they prevent the flow of blood back out of the heart. So we want it all to move in one way. What helps with that is we have these tendons called chordae tendineae. So the cords there are chordae tendineae, also known as heartstrings. Attached to that is a papillary muscle, and those help keep this open when blood is flowing through here, but it also stops the flaps or leaflets from going the other way, allowing blood flow outside of the right ventricle. Next, we have the pulmonary semilunar valve. The pulmonary semilunar valve, we have the word pulmonary, which means it's going to the lungs. Semilunar refers to these cusps, which are shaped kind of like a crescent moon. So these are called leaflets, and these are called cusps. This is where the blood heads to the lungs, and then it'll actually come back through the bicuspid, or the left atrial ventricular valve. This only has two leaflets on it, so it's a bicuspid. It's the left atrial ventricular valve. And again, we have those chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. Lastly, we have the aortic semilunar valve. This valve leads to the aorta, where blood goes to the rest of the body. Clinically, valve disorders like mitral valve prolapse can cause significant health issues if not managed properly. You might know someone who's had valve replacement surgery. Blood flows in a specific path through the heart. You're expected to be able to trace where blood will move through the heart from any given chamber and which valve it will be moving to or from. So pay special attention to this slide. This would be a great one to study. So on the right here, you can see the path that blood takes through the heart. We'll start off from the superior and inferior vena cava. Blood that has been used by the tissues, so it's now lower oxygen concentration or oxygen poor blood, and carbon dioxide rich blood. This will end up moving into the superior and inferior vena cava. Well, it will then move into the right atrium. The right atrium will then contract, pushing that blood through the right atrioventricular valve, or the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle. Remember, the right ventricle has a thinner myocardium than the left. Then the blood will move up and through the pulmonary semilunar valve, which will move blood from the right ventricle into the lungs. There's a left and right pulmonary artery, and those are moving oxygen poor blood into the lungs. The blood is then oxygenated and brought back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. Now there's four total veins. There's the right and left, and in the right and left there's a superior and inferior vein. All of those connect into the left atrium. The left atrium then pumps the blood through the left atrioventricular valve, or the mitral valve, into the left ventricle. The left ventricle then contracts and pushes the blood through the aortic semilunar valve, where it will move up the ascending aorta, across the aortic arch, and down the descending aorta. And then the blood moves to the rest of the body, and the blood gets used by the tissues, and we restart the cycle. Let's test your knowledge with a quick quiz. Can you trace the path of a red blood cell starting from the right atrium? Go ahead and pause the video and try that. Let's take a look at some histology. Cardiac muscle tissue is characterized by its unique structural features and specialized function. It consists of short branch cells known as myocytes, which provide the strength and resilience necessary for continuous heart contractions. These cells are distinctly marked by striations, indicative of their organized arrangement of actin and myosin filaments. One of the defining characteristics of cardiac muscle cells is the presence of intercalated discs. These discs are specialized junctions that connect individual myocytes, allowing for synchronized contraction and efficient transmission of electrical impulses across the heart muscle. Each cardiac muscle cell typically contains one centrally located nucleus. This tissue is located exclusively in the heart, and it's responsible for the involuntary contractions that pump blood throughout the body, ensuring constant circulation. The average resting heart rate for a healthy adult typically ranges between 60 and 100 beats per minute. This rhythm is maintained by the heart's ability to produce electrochemical impulses which originate in the sinoatrial node and propagate through the heart's conductive system. These impulses prompt the heart to contract and pump blood, and their electrical activity can be measured with an electrocardiogram or ECG. Deviations from the normal heart rate can indicate various health conditions such as tachycardia, an excessively high resting heart rate that strains the heart, and bradycardia, an abnormally low resting heart rate that can lead to insufficient blood flow and oxygen delivery. The heartbeat involves both mechanical and electrical events, with systole, shown in the picture on the right, being the contraction phase that pumps blood out of the heart, and diastole being the relaxation phase that allows the heart to fill with blood. These mechanical events are driven by electrical changes. Depolarization triggers contraction or systole, and repolarization leads to relaxation, or diastole. Understanding these processes is crucial for diagnosing and managing cardiovascular health. The heart's conduction system includes the SA node, or sinoatrial node. This is the first step of the heartbeat. We need to depolarize the atria. And so the SA node will depolarize, and it actually connects to both atria. The actual node is present inside of the right atrium. And then our signal moves into the AV node, or the atrioventricular node. This is the node that connects the atrium to the ventricles. So we have the SA node and AV node. Now, it can be hard to differentiate those and remember the difference, but one thing that can help is the SA node starts with S and starts with S. So the SA node starts, the AV node moves from the atrium to the ventricles, and then we move into the bundle of His. The bundle of His connects both of the bundle branches, where it will then separate into the Purkinje fibers. These components ensure the heart beats in a coordinated manner. An arrhythmia or irregular heartbeat can disrupt this process and lead to serious health problems. So now you understand some components of the electrical system of the heart, but now we got to apply it to the EKG. Now, we introduce the idea of EKGs, and EKGs are interchangeable with ECGs. EKG is the same, but the K is the German way of saying electrocardiogram. So there's K's in electrocardiogram instead of C's, where the American English version is ECG, because that electrocardiogram is spelled with an EC and a G. An EKG is a vital tool used to measure the electrical activity of the heart. This helps us assess the heart's rhythm and identify any potential abnormalities when we look at an EKG. We can see a series of waves, each representing a specific part of the cardiac cycle. Let's break down the key concepts. So we have a P wave at the very start of this cycle. The P wave represents atrial depolarization, or contraction, right? Which is when the aorta contracts to push blood into the ventricles. It's the first small upward deflection on the EKG tracing. Then we run into this very jagged QRS complex. This complex represents ventricular depolarization, which is the contraction of the ventricles to pump blood out of the lungs and the rest of the body. The QRS complex is a series of three deflections: the Q wave, the R wave, and the S wave. And this is much larger than the P wave due to the greater muscle mass of the ventricles. Then we get into the T wave. This wave represents ventricular repolarization, which is the recovery phase when the ventricles are relaxing and refilling with blood. It appears as a modest upwards deflection following the QRS complex. Each of these waves corresponds with an essential electrical and mechanical event in the heart. The entire process from the beginning of the heartbeat to the next is known as a cardiac cycle, and it takes about 0.8 seconds. To summarize, the P wave signals atrial depolarization. The QRS complex indicates ventricular depolarization, and at the same time, atrial repolarization. So the atrium are recovering, while the ventricles are depolarizing. The T wave represents ventricular repolarization. So then, that's when the ventricles relax. Understanding these concepts allows us to diagnose various cardiac conditions, such as arrhythmias, heart attacks, and electrolyte imbalances. By analyzing the patterns and intervals on an EKG tracing, we get a lot. So we'll have a few scenarios of EKGs, and I want you to try to apply what you learned from this slide. Let's examine these 4 different EKG patterns to understand how they indicate various cardiac conditions. First, let's take a look at this one. What can you tell from this EKG? We have a T wave, we have a Q, R, and S, but the S is higher than normal, and the T is higher than normal. So this is a STEMI. This is an ST elevation myocardial infarction. This pattern shows significant elevation in the ST segment. It indicates a serious type of heart attack where a coronary artery is completely blocked, requiring immediate medical intervention. So notice that ST elevated segment there? Well, that's suggesting a major blockage and damage to heart muscle. Next, we'll move to this one. Do you see any T wave? I don't see any T waves, but I do see a QRS complex. And then lots of wiggles. So this is atrial fibrillation, or AFib. In this pattern, you can see irregular and often rapid heartbeats with no distinct P waves. Instead, there are erratic, uncoordinated electrical signals in the atria. This results in an irregular heartbeat, which can lead to blood clots, stroke, and other heart-related conditions if not managed properly. How about this pattern here? So this is actually a normal EKG. So this is normal. We see our P waves, our QRS complex, and our T waves. How about this last one here? Do you know what you're looking at? It's not good. So this is ventricular fibrillation. This is a life-threatening condition where the ventricles quiver instead of contracting properly due to disorganized electrical activity. The EKG shows a chaotic and irregular pattern with no discernible P wave, QRS complex, or T wave. So immediate defibrillation is required to restore a normal heart rhythm and prevent sudden cardiac death. So this is when you would shock someone with a defibrillator. So you're not expected to be able to diagnose these patterns. You are expected to be able to differentiate what a normal one looks like and what a non-normal one looks like, and then tell what part of the heart is influenced. So if the P wave is missing, then you should be able to infer that the atria are not contracting or not having electrical signal. So which part of the heart is affected by the P wave? It's the atria, and it's also electrically the SA node. So go through these and try to describe what would be happening electrically and mechanically for all of these situations. There are many different kinds of EKGs, but the most popular are a 3-lead EKG, a 5-lead, and a 12-lead. These are used in various settings to monitor heart activity. These leads provide different perspectives of the heart's electrical activity and are used based on the clinical situation. There are 3 main types of EKGs, so 3 on the left, 5 in the middle, and 12 on the right. The 3 lead EKGs typically used in emergency settings and used for surgeries for basic heart rhythm monitoring. And this is something we will do in class. The 5 lead EKG is commonly used in the hospital setting for continuous monitoring and offers a more comprehensive view of the heart's activity. This is something you'll be hooked up to for many surgeries, anytime you're under observation post-surgery, stuff like that. Then on the right we have the 12-lead EKG, and it's the standard for diagnostic purposes, providing detailed information about the heart's electrical activity from multiple angles. So this is the tool that a doctor will use to diagnose something like a heart attack, or also known as a STEMI, ST elevated myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, or to diagnose something like an electrolyte imbalance that also can affect the heart. But basically, it's 10 leads that go onto the body, and they measure the heart in different angles. So if you ever go to the hospital or the emergency department and you say, my chest hurts, or I can't breathe right, this is what they're going to do right away to check and see how your heart's doing. For the dissection, take it slow. You will need to look at the exterior of the sheep heart and identify anterior and posterior sides, and what is left and right. Then you can move on to identify the vessels and other exterior portions of the heart. After that, you can move on and make your first incision to see the interior of the heart. Follow your TA's instructions and make sure to wear closed-toed shoes in lab. If you are unable to participate in this dissection, make sure to reach out to your TA and watch the dissection on the class portal. Here is an image of a sheep heart. Can you tell which side you're looking at? Learning anatomy becomes much harder when the tissue is preserved and not colored like in our images. I will give you a big hint on how to find the posterior and anterior parts of the heart. Here it is hard to see which side the apex is pointing. Another way to find out which side of the heart you are looking at is to look out for this T-shape with the adipose tissue. This is made by the posterior interventricular sulcus and the coronary arteries, veins, and sinus. This lets you know that you are looking at the posterior part of the heart. All right, and that covers the heart. So please make sure you check the syllabus for any due dates and study for those test questions. See you in class.